for some of you, this is going to be a little bit of a ride because this is not research at all. So this is going to be a joint collaboration where I help you understand the world I come from, and then you help me understand like how I can best bring academic voices, research, and all of the rich experience that you have into the work that we're doing. So this is what I'm going to talk about. So I'm going to talk about what the Agency for International Development was. It is like officially totally dismantled as of last week. Yeah, last week. And we're constantly, thank you. I'm also going to talk about my journey. So these are going to be a little bit of interweaving threads. I'm a coach, right? So like we're going to put all the lessons in together. And then I'm going to talk about what we're doing now, reimagining global conservation, a blueprint for U.S. future role, which is super preliminary. So on the downside, you're going to be like, there's no detail here. On the bright side, yeah, we're open to everything. Nothing is set in stone yet. So here we go. Okay, what was the Agency for International Development? So it was established in 1961 by John F. Kennedy. And I put two quotes on here. One of those is the aspirational quote, like a free society cannot help the many who are poor, it cannot save the few who are rich. I'm also going to put in here all along, because this is US foreign assistance, right? It's not just to like be nice. So it's also about maintaining a position of influence and control around the world. And specifically as part of our national security strategy, development is one leg of the three-legged stools of diplomacy, defense, right, now war, which really does not alliterate, and development. Those are the three legs of the stool. So, and there is no USAID. Development is now part of a function of the State Department along with diplomacy. That is like the state of the world that it is right now. Okay, so I'm just going to give you a little bit of the breadth of USAID, and both for time, I'm not going to go into a lot of it, both for time and because I have no information. The USAID website was pulled down. It was illegal for us to pull down any files that were not our own personal files. So I pulled the things I put up here, the very little data from like mirror websites that are out there, and one thing in the State Department that had data from 2023, which was the last full fiscal year where the funding was actually implemented. So that is like a pretty harsh reality of the context we work in and the way people try to find jobs with no access to anything that they did or any of their PowerPoints, which sucks, is what I would say. Okay, so $45 billion, so not too little. Health, definitely the #1 source of funding each year. A lot of this funding is also specific to like the crises at the time. So there were some Ukraine supplements that came through this. Some of that had food security work in it. It's like there's a lot of politics in this, obviously. $2 billion for environmental funding. That is not all conservation funding. I'll talk about that. That included, this was a Biden administration year. It included broader climate funding. It included renewable energy funding, some air pollution funding, plastics, some of those other things. I will say one of the most important things to understand about agencies is how these things work. I'm not going to talk about it, but like if anybody needs to know, either here or later, talking about how those different pillars of funding work is much more important than you would think. But another important thing to know is that the funding at USAID was decentralized. So that means that funding, most of it, in like 90% of it in most of the different sectors, not humanitarian assistance and to some degree not health, went to our field missions and they programmed it. And what's important to understand is while that doesn't mean it's all local and it goes through local implementers, it does mean that what we did was agreed upon in partnership with the host country government. So these are the categories we want to work on. These are the priorities for the country. And then also these are the sources of flavors of funding that we have available that for this country that we can. So it is a partnership. It is not just the US deciding what to do unilaterally. All right, so conservation at AID. So early USAID work, meaning before I got there, I was actually there 32 years in total, so I feel like that counts as early, focused on rural development, and staff in the field just saw the connections, right, of ecosystem services, local people values, sustainability, cultural, spiritual values, and the global value, right? These are global public goods. So even early on, like the value from a climate mitigation benefit, which we did know about in the 80s, even pretty broadly, and biodiversity, very clearly known. The first documented conservation efforts, by which we mean, because there are no resources, the ones that I know about, are from the 80s. And they were built in often to some pretty flexible funding that was helping people deal with food security in rural areas and other rural development programs, which was some of the first work we did. So I love doing this here because Patrick Leahy is the one who supported the first directed funding for biodiversity around the year 2000, 100 million a year. We used to say that like his staffer, like if anything happened to him, we weren't sure there was going to be funding for biodiversity. And why this matters is that the immediate urgent pressures always swamp out those global public goods. So part of the idea here, and it's consistent with the little I know about economic theory, is that you do need to like really set that aside first. Otherwise, you're just not going to prioritize it. It's like your investment in your future, your retirement savings. You don't just wait and do what's left at the end of the month with your urgent needs. You set it aside first and then you go forward. So, so that was something we were grateful for. So skipping ahead, in the end then, we were investing 500 million a year annually for conservation. So that's far larger than biodiversity, but I will say we were arguably the largest donor for biodiversity conservation. There's like ways you can slice and dice it, but there's a pretty strong, and I feel pretty confident in that. And we supported conservation efforts in over 60 countries. I'm gonna say this a couple times. I'm gonna like talk about the good and the bad sides of US foreign assistance conservation in that context, but we were a conservation linchpin in a lot of ways. And honestly, tragically, one of the ways we know it is seeing what's happening now worldwide. And I talk about some of the leaders I talked to, like the people who like I see cry when I talk to them about their jobs are the people who are like working in conservation and like all the supporting investment is gone, like literally leaders in tears. It's really shocking. So we were also working, and I like to say this because people didn't know this, like we worked long-term. We would work in a lot of places for like in 5-year bits, but sometimes for 20, 30 years in the same places where there was a need for that long-term investment and capacity for local actors to be able to engage. We did work in partnerships with private sector and also grounded in local context and often with local actors. So, and particularly like through those in-person missions, which is a pretty important piece of it. And then this happened. So I'll go back to January 2025. There's a lot of narratives about what happened to USAID, and most of them are like, oh, we didn't have enough constituency, we didn't see it coming, we should have seen it. But this is what happened, and it's very well documented. There's a great New York Times article, I think it was in the spring, that explains this. So what actually happened is that, so 1 week into the new administration, they fired the top 58 people in their agency, including my direct supervisor, like out. So they put them on admin leave and they were trying to fire them from cause, which means you lose all of your benefits for anything, right? So it's a pretty big deal. And we were just not prepared, right? They also took like, kind of decapitated us. They put our chief information officer as the head of the agency. That was not the person who we expected, like the head of our tech systems, not who we anticipated to be in charge. Normal checks and balances failed. So we've seen this more broadly, but it happened in a like shocking way. Like other agencies that were later targeted, they did quickly get a check on that power and they had to roll back. No one was ready for that when that happened at AID. The first thing that happened after those people went out is on January 24th, they shut down all of our funding, right? So that affected you, people here, and their work and the research that came from us. We worked with a lot of you in a lot of different ways, like my staff directly, and also through other partners and partnerships over the years and currently, all shut down. And there were misunderstandings. So there are these rogue people in key spots, one of them especially rogue, and one of them was more like a kid, like, you know, some 19-year-old who basically just had power to shut things down. And they pulled everyone at AID off the system because they believed we were still paying out funding because we were paying what we owed from work from before. So it was like a misunderstanding and it just went out of control. So it just went quickly retaliatory, and then it was a point of no return. So this was more like somebody definitely set a fire, right? That was intended to like do damage. But then like some people came along with, you know, gasoline and all the firefighters were shut down. That was it. Like, it was just all over. All right, now we've been there. We're going to go back to a happier time. When this is baby Cynthia. So baby Cynthia, I am wearing a shirt. It's like faded here. Have a lot of comments. This is my original ID from there. So March 1994. It has my full social security number and birth date on the back because like that's just the way things were. So I was just turned 25 years old. This is my almost 25-year-old daughter here. You're gonna hear her mentioned one more time for a point of reference. I love that she happened to be here for this. So like there was no biodiversity team reunion at the time. Here's why I took this job. My husband, who I was not yet married to, was in law school and I needed like a job. And so, you know, I went to the big NGOs, I was looking for work. I was like trying to find my way. And then my neighbor who I handed my CV to and said, I need a job, do you know of? And he said, oh yeah, I hear that USAID is hiring some technical writers right now. I'm like, oh, I saw this like hotel being built in the jungles of Costa Rica, which seemed like a really bad idea. So I think I'll just like see if I can get this job to make money and see why development is so terrible. That was my entire theory of change, maybe. I don't know if I can quite call it that. So I really did not know what I was getting into, but what happened is I got there and AID was like the most amazing place to work. Like smart, dedicated, interesting people who were like from around the world and have, you know, incredibly diverse perspectives who were all there to like literally try and save the world in the way they can. Not that we can, but like, what can I do to get in that direction? So I had incredible opportunities for growth and influence. Like I got to work on the most amazing activities, travel around the world, like really, really an incredible experience. And people feel bad for me for losing my job. I'm like, no, like I had a 32-year incredibly amazing career. It's the people who are just starting or who are just really getting, that's where like my heart goes out to them. It's tough. Anyway, so that's how I started. So 7 years after I started, I was in charge of the 4-person biodiversity team. These are the 4 of us this year. We happened to all be at a workshop this summer on this reimagining conservation and realized, wait, it's us again. That is also the year I was pregnant with this one here also. And yeah, so that was that beginning of that phase. So when I say my 25-year leadership career at AID, I mean, that's when I took on a leadership role, but like of like a little team. You know, that was like totally appropriate for where I was at that point in my life. And then it grew because the attention, focus, and our capacity to deal with the issue grew. So I was really lucky to be where I was. I worked through 6 administrations, and that's not counting like, you know, Obama 1 and Obama 2, because those are technically different administrations, or there were a couple of those. So when I did start though, the paradigm for conservation was like not pretty. So programming was stovepipe. So that means like you did just your thing and you did not talk to the other person who was doing the thing in the same area that might have had like opposite goals. It was very tool focused, like let's work on protected areas or let's work on environmental education and where can we go do environmental education or protected areas. So it's like not, I would say, very strategic. Also not necessarily inclusive or inclusive in like a very non-sophisticated way. And when I started, there were people like there would be an ambassador who would come in and be like, well, this forest is getting cut down, so we should educate the local people so they don't cut it down. Like people actually thought that at the time. Not everybody, lots of people didn't, but like, and that can happen anywhere, but it was like we had a very long way to go in a lot of places. So not that we fixed it all, but I really hope that during the time you're at AID, we got to accountability and adaptive management. So like that's theories of change. Like what is your goal? How do you get there? Maybe it's this logging concession that is the bigger threat than the local people in this place. Or maybe the local people have managed this place successfully for years, but they're not empowered to continue the governance that they've been doing. Like what is the situation and how can you help it? Hopefully strategic and inclusive. How can you do it effectively? What is the political economy you're working in? Also thinking about behavior change and how people change their guides, safeguards, people in power and local people who are not empowered, which is actually more complex than one would think. Localization, local voices, integration, partnerships, finance, many more. And actually, I'm sorry, I'm going to pause. This is actually like a very nice example of conservancies in northern Kenya, which is very locally run. And most funding goes through local organizations in that case. And I think one of the things I like about it is that, as a story, is that the issue that this solved for a lot of local people at that time, like residents there, was security. It's in northern Kenya where there's a lot of famine and drought, and the thing that was one of their biggest concerns was cattle raiding. And so these systems enabled people to have a forum for better governance so that they were able to resolve conflict without having that sort of conflict in like personal security. There's a whole lot more to that story, obviously, but and of course they were still funding recipients who don't have funding from us now, so they're trying to fill those gaps in this time. And that's true for many of the places and pictures I have here, even though I'm not going through all the stories. All right, so I'm going to step back a little bit and just talk about my critical decision points in that 32-year journey. So we all have critical decision points. So a couple big ones, particularly because I got really interesting advice in this one. So how to handle management problems and grow my own voice, and then hearing my own voice and making career decisions at those really critical times. So early on, I had problems with a staff member who was like not accountable. And like I was getting messages from our missions, remember those people working overseas, like, hey, this guy is here, we don't know why he's here. And then he's like off doing sort of like boondoggle things, like not the work we're trying to do here. So I talked to my supervisor who said that, well, you could say that, but you don't want to be seen as a bitch, do you? So that was one piece of advice I got early on. Same year, I was working at my desk, and I had actually been considering another job, and actually where Taylor was working either at the time or right around then. I was pretty excited about it. It was a more technical position, pretty big decision. And that other boss's boss came to me and said, hey, I know you're looking at this job, and I know it's a more technical job, and that's like definitely the sexy thing that people are working towards, but like you really like management, and I see that, and you really just like to see things get done, which if anyone knows me is like 100% who I am. And just think about where you're going to have influence and where you're going to be able to be most effective and where you're going to have the growth that you want, and don't listen to that peer pressure. So, one of those people was banned from working with the government at one point. And one of them is like very, very much in my life at age 81, like a huge part of my life. So I want to tell that story partly because I think that like we talk about the work, which is what I've been doing, the technical story, the political story, but like it's always a personal story too. And Taylor wisely said, make sure you put that in here. I'm like, no, that's right. Because for me, I feel like what I'm most proud of is not like, I love that I got to work on the accounting programs and design things, but the things where I felt like I made the difference was where I was like, hey, let's step back. Like, can we look at this differently? And even if I didn't have the solutions, which I probably mostly didn't, I was like, hey, let's just look at this differently. And I don't care as much what I am doing. I care to see things happen. That's who I am. So also as leaders, because we're all on our own leadership journey, Judy, anytime you talk to somebody and you see them, and they hear that they see you, that is what matters. Like I remember that conversation. I remember exactly everything about it, like where he was standing, where I was, what I was doing. It's like just etched in my mind. So it's something to always keep in mind because those moments are important. And I'll just mention one other point on this and take a little time on the slide. So, always paying attention to what are the big things, right? Toxic situations when you're overworked and when you're underworked. So, or under challenged. So this is my last trip I took at USAID. So I was like, had things in pretty good shape. So I decided my last big thing to work at USAID was working on integration, really trying to break down some of the barriers and conversations and concrete work between food systems work and biodiversity, conservation broadly, including biodiversity. So I invited myself on like this trip, which had nothing on the agenda relevant to me. And I'm just like, I'm going anyway. I'm gonna go because the people who have all the influence and who I don't know how to work with are on this trip. So I like got myself on the agenda, went to Zambia. It turns out the project was super integrated. And if those people told me that's what they were doing, I would not have believed them. I would have been like, no, you guys just don't really understand. It was like incredible. It was really empowering and could have been the start to something great. But instead, we're back to the end of that story. So that was last November. We had just launched a biodiversity policy for a new future. under Trump 1, we had developed a framework for environment, natural resources management. It, didn't have anything politically like difficult that really aligned with the administration's goals. So we thought maybe it'd be okay. We also thought like other agencies would get hit first. So I'm like giving all these talks inspirational. We'll just see what happens to like this other agency, and then we'll have time and we'll figure it out. And I had a plan. So my plan was to gracefully retire in 2027, right? I was going to work on this integration work for 2 years. And I really felt like I had these connections. The person I just connected Yolanda with was going to be like the person I could really advance this agenda with, because I knew we thought broadly and we worked together in Mexico. And then I was going to just focus on coaching senior mission-driven leaders and emerging adults. That seemed like a great transition plan. I figured out the conservation part later. But, of course, instead, we hit 2025. And so obviously it became clear super quickly there was no one coming to save USAID, right? Like that, no one saw it coming, and it happened. But what also hit me is that no one was coming to pick up the pieces for global conservation. And we'd had that huge role, and I was seeing it. Conservation organizations locally and here, and associated ones, they're just shut down. Like, government people mostly got funded through like July or September, some a little earlier. The partners lost their funding and their jobs in February. So my friends who are like working on this, they have been out of work. Their uninsurance, unemployment insurance is over. Like it is really, really tough, and it's shocking. And maybe I don't have the data to do it. Maybe I also not really wanting to get into it. It's hard, and it feels personal. It's just tough. And I also feel that I couldn't convey the enormity of what it meant while still recognizing what was not working. And one of the most important things is that those networks, the communication, the evidence, it's all gone. It's broken up and broken down. So the people who worked on this, we are a diaspora. We're not all going to the next conservation congress. We're not, there's not a way for us to connect that's natural. So this occurred to me probably March, April. And then I heard from Taylor, who's like, hey, what do you think about working with gun control? And I was like, yes, Vermont is my favorite state, obviously, right? It seems self-evident. So I was very excited to come to Vermont. Also, my kids are gone. I was like, yes, leave for 4 months. Yes, I did not pause and ask my husband. It's like, oh yes, no, I would love to do that. Yeah. He was agreeable, right? Everyone was on board. I mean, my dog probably has a lot of thoughts about it, but other than that, everyone is on board about it. But I just didn't know how to move forward. So between now and then, there was some progress. So we're coming to now. So this group of people, I was continuing to talk to people, and honestly, I was just getting crickets. Nobody knew what was happening, or people were focused on very, very short-term concerns. So I ran into this person who I worked with at WWF back in the day. We are complete opposites, but we are both pretty, I keep forgetting the word, sentimental, thank you, because I stumbled when I was talking to my daughter about it too. Non-sentimental. So I'm sentimental, but later. I have to kind of do it little by little, that work, right? As I talk about feelings a lot, because I have to do my own work on my feelings all the time. And I'm pretty quickly was okay, so what are we gonna do? And we all thought foundations would step up. Foundations have their own challenges, and I think that's what was also not clear. The whole funding landscape is a mess, period. It's not just AAD. It's not oh, AID's gone, everyone else is good. Other bilateral donors are not doing well, right? Foundations have their own challenges. There's a lot of context that people are working through. There's what can people pick up and what's the capacity. So Nick was working with most of these other people, and my colleague Kadas is working on a fellowship that's aligned to this work. So the 7 of us are just the people who thought we should do something. And also most of us come from a facilitation background. So we all might have our views on it. My view is I literally embody 32 years at USAID. I am the old guard, right? That is it. I should not have anything to do with the contents of the blueprints. I can answer questions as a resource, oh, why did you not do this? Oh, this is why. But I can't argue, oh, we should do that, or we should do this. So it might be very unsatisfying when we get to the blueprint questions, but I really, really care about making the space to do that. And that's something that I can do. because people feel bad and will talk to us. And, we have networks and connections because I am somebody who's been there for a long time. So that is what we're doing. Here is our support, and I'm going to mention this a few times because it's so clear to me. So obviously I'm being partially supported by Gunn. So first it was just me. She just put Cynthia Gill's time. That's true for all of us, but we're also really all institutions are a little in a tough place or, an uncertain environment. And they're all offering support to a better future. And that's really important. And it's actually something that I've seen more of, and I think will come up as we go further. Here's what we're trying to do. We're trying to facilitate, right? A blueprint for future US involvement in global conservation, because we do think it will happen again. And we want a coalition of stakeholders to shepherd that blueprint forward. And that has some meaning, what needs to happen for that to be a viable product. Because we're just, again, these people right now, we're not a commissioned appointed group to do this. So it's our job to get the voices together that speak for a community and voice the diversity of opinions and views. So here's our timeline. So, March, June, we talked about, we early on decided that we cared a lot about the vibe. We started talking about this and what's the first thing you do if you're going to do a blueprint? Well, we should go do a review of what's the past and where's the future? Okay, good, yeah. And that is really important. And if we're just doing this with the people we know, we're not making enough noise that other people say, oh, wait, you need to talk to so-and-so, you need to bring these people in. What about this? We need to bring the noise. And honestly, we need to share the hope a little bit. We need to feel like we can all use some hope and inspiration, and that's definitely better together than apart. So I'll skip over basically. We had another group. Taylor's also involved from here. And then in 10 days, we're going to Climate Week. And oh my God, the call right before this, we got a lot to do. So we'll be there. We will be ready. But I will say that's just because it's an opportunity to convene. And then we need to double down and it's time to get to work. So vision. So we are that initiative as opposed to an organization. We're not trying to create a new organization. I definitely personally never want to lead anything again except for possibly that large dog. I really would like to have listen to me one day. We're designing for a future moment, which is relevant because there's a lot of political context now. And we're not trying to work in this now, but we do need to work in a political context that will exist in the future. And I think this kind of repeats what I just said. So we need that network and actionable blueprints. So we have these working groups. I am actually working on the political economy group. That's the hard hat, seems appropriate, which is understanding what's the world we're working in and what's important there. The comms and engagement group is going to be a close partner of that political group. And the vision group is everybody all together. So I'm gonna just make sure I get to the blueprint. So the blueprint is the desired vision. So that's actually what do we want? What do we want conservation to look like in the future? And I'm going to put a slide with some of the big questions, shortly. And then what are the functions? How do we want that to work? How do we want funding to be accessed? How do we want to partner? Under that are the structures. So there's underlying legislation that really constrained a lot of what we did before. Is that something that's important to change? Back to that political group. Is that something there's an appetite for change? If not, is it so important we need to push on it? It's very iterative and complementary. And then talking about what are the pathways to get there, which includes very much that coalition piece. Epilogue is core assumptions, which includes documenting a bit of what was and a lot about what we here as the demands. So for the coalition, I think I've really said most of this, other than there is, just to repeat, that there is actually an existing constituency, a bipartisan constituency for conservation. So we do need to think about how we think broadly and still produce something that's palatable. So my view as a coach, some of you guys have seen me do this, let's let go of our assumptions and think really bigly about it, let's think bigly about all of our solutions and then put the constraints on it. When you plan your life, you can think really big and then be okay, I still really care about this, but it's gonna take a long time. You don't have to be all in with the first solution you come with, but you should not constrain first. That does not work. Yeah, I think I've said all of those points there. Okay, so here's the questions, and I'm gonna just go through this quickly and we're gonna come back to this because that's what I'll have up for our discussion, because these are the kinds of questions that we hope to facilitate. And these are the ones that we hear the most, in addition to a lot of ones that are very specific about how funding and the barriers to getting funding and how big of an institution and what you needed to be able to get funding. There's really like a lot of that sort of nuts and bolts stuff that really matters, because local organizations could not always meet those conditions. So it mattered because it meant they couldn't always directly access funding. Okay, so we're gonna come back to this one. So like I said, we're on borrowed and gifted time, and we need more consistent support, and we're iterative because we want to get out there and get the voices and then pin things down. So we are moving to the phase where we need to be more in the pinning down and less on the voices, but that's okay. And like I said, broad debate, politically viable product. That's it. So I'm gonna go back to this other slide for questions, but yeah.